My name is Andrew James Clark, and I'm excited to be here today and talk to you about Gary Kulesha's Two Pieces for Piano. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. When I learned this, I was only 19. The first time I learned this, I was only 19, and I hadn't learned anything about serial music or atonal music or 12-tone music. And I remember playing it for the first time and bringing it to my piano teacher at the University of Toronto, whose name was Mia Bach. And I played it for her, and it was probably, I didn't give a good performance, and she looked right at me and said, "Are you sure about this piece? You know, what do you think about it?" And I said something really, really strange, which I'll never forget. I looked her straight in the face and said, "I don't really know what's going on in this piece, but for some strange reason, whenever I play it, I feel like I'm on a top secret mission. In fact, I kind of feel like I'm in a fast sports car wearing a suit and my life is in jeopardy." Now, that wasn't the right answer, in case you're wondering, and she didn't comment, and we moved on with the piano lesson, and we didn't talk about that ever again. It wasn't until years later I figured out why I said something so bizarre. So, I'm going to play you a couple notes on the piano. I want you to listen carefully, and I want you to see if you recognize what I'm about to play. Now, if you watch a lot of movies, you may know that that's the brass riff from the middle of the James Bond theme song. Now, listen closely. I'm going to play the first 4 notes of Gary Kulesha's Two Pieces for Piano. Listen. The primary notes in the James Bond theme song are the exact same notes that open this piece. So I'm not that crazy. That's why, for all those years, I felt like I was a spy agent when I was performing this piece in public. Now, believe it or not, this piece actually only uses 3 chords. It uses that James Bond chord, it uses an augmented 7th chord, and a mixed chord. So I think it's 6 or 7 minutes long, but only 3 chords? How is that possible? Well, there's a cool compositional technique called octave displacement. And if you listen to the recording I made of this piece and you didn't immediately hear the James Bond theme song, I don't blame you. It's tricky because of this concept of octave displacement. So if you're a young composer watching this video, this is one of the compositional techniques that you can steal and use in your own music. Octave displacement is when we take a musical idea or a small musical fragment, and we take the notes and we stretch them out and scatter them in different places around the piano. So in the James Bond theme song, those notes are really close. I can fit it in one hand. But for Two Pieces for Piano, those notes are stretched out across the keyboard. It's a really cool technique, and in fact, Two Pieces for Piano is kind of like a study in octave displacement. In the second movement, there is not a single bar which does not take advantage of this technique. The second movement is just 3 chords in octave displacement over and over and over again, which is why my hands have to fly really, really fast in order to play it. So octave displacement is a great way to make simple music material much more complex. And if you're a young composer and you got stuck composing your piece, you can use octave displacement to push it along and give yourself a few more options. Now, the next compositional technique I want to talk about that's related to Two Pieces for Piano is called written out accelerandos. Now, there's a lot of polyrhythms in this piece, and when pianists hear the term polyrhythm, usually the first composer who comes to mind is Chopin. The polyrhythms in a Chopin nocturne or in a ballade are not like the polyrhythms in Two Pieces for Piano. When Chopin uses a polyrhythm, he's usually doing it to enhance a melody or to diversify returning material or just to emphasize melodic contour. In Two Pieces for Piano, polyrhythms occur, but they're lined up in a special way that form what I said, a written out accelerando. Now, if you are a musician, you may have seen the term accelerando in your score somewhere before. That, of course, just means to speed up. But a written out accelerando is a little different. It's more of a contemporary special effect. You see, in a written out accelerando, what happens is there may be a polyrhythm with just a few notes, like 4/5. And then the next bar will have 6/7. Then the next bar might have 7/8. And each bar we hear has another note squeezed into it. Now the effect of this on the audience is that they perceive the musician to be speeding up when really the time isn't changing. So even though the performer is playing in the same meter and the same tempo, the audience hears more and more notes coming out of the instrument and they assume that they must be speeding up. This is particularly important in this piece because in the first movement, this written out accelerando leads us to the climax of the first movement of this work. And it's really satisfying to play. It's one of the more difficult passages in the work. What happens is my left hand plays some notes and my right hand plays a different amount of notes in equal time. And what happens is the audience feels like there's two different time zones going on, and I feel like my brain is splitting in half. This gets faster and faster and faster until finally at the climax, the tempos of my hands merge back together and the piece synthesizes, and it's really, really powerful. It's really hard to explain in words how satisfying it is to spend a minute with two tempos in each hand and then finally come back together. It's the most it's one of my favorite parts of the piece, and it's really fun to play. Now the last thing I want to talk about is musical punctuation. Now, if you're a pianist, I hope I'm going to do a good job in this video, and I hope I'm going to inspire you to add this piece to your repertoire. But it is serial and it is 12-tone, and it can be really frightening to try to bring atonal music of this nature to general audiences. It's really, really hard to predict how audiences are going to react to music like this. You may have some people who show up to your concert who may have simply never heard atonal music before, and they're probably going to be mad by default because they didn't know this music existed and they weren't expecting it. There may be other members of the audience who have heard music like this before and even enjoy serial and 12-tone music, but just because someone enjoys 12-tone music doesn't mean they can listen to an entire concert's worth of it. Everybody has a different level of endurance for this type of music. Another reason why it's difficult to bring atonal music to general audiences, and this is something I found in my personal experience, is that it's often difficult for listeners who don't have a lot of experience with this genre. It's hard for them to see where one musical idea ends and another musical idea begins. This can be tough because as classical musicians, we're always supposed to be imitating human speech. This is one thing that separates the classical music genre from other musical genres. But if audience members can't hear the phrasing, what happens is they perceive the piece to be one gigantic, long, run-on sentence, and they detach from your concert and your performance. And this can be really stressful and lead to no one coming to your next concert. So one of the reasons why Two Pieces for Piano is my go-to piece for introducing atonal music to general audiences is because Gary Kulesha came up with a great solution to this problem, and he actually built it right into the score of this piece. Now, if you listened to my recording, you'll notice that very frequently the music stops and you hear this spooky two-note motive. It sounds something like this. Or something like this. Now, believe it or not, this two-note motive keeps reoccurring over and over, and fortunately for me as the performer, it acts as a musical punctuation marker. So no matter how overwhelmed the audience gets, they'll listen to a musical idea, then everything will pause, and then they'll hear the two notes, da-dum, and they'll hear more energy in another musical phrase, and then pause, silence, ya-dum, another two-note motive. It's really useful, okay? It keeps the audience on board. As a performer, I look at the score and it allows me to see the phrases clearly. I can see the sections, I can see the parameters and the dimensions of the piece. And most importantly, it allows me to form a musical narrative in my head that I know that I feel confident about, and then I can give it to the audience instead of being unsure exactly of what I'm performing and then trying to convince the audience to enjoy it. It's very, very useful. And it's one of the reasons why I actually use this piece to, again, introduce audiences to atonal music and to even introduce young music students to atonal music for the first time. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoyed this inside look at Two Pieces for Piano by Gary Kulesha. If you're a pianist, I hope you're inspired to add it to your repertoire and take a chance on it. If you're a young composer, I hope you learn some new compositional techniques to help you in your own music. And I hope you will join us for our next video, which will come out soon.